October 16th, 1835, Robert Corron arrived here and began settling, and 150 years later, the Corrons are still going strong. Now, Cindy drew a kind of a short form family chart. It's going to be the basis, I guess you'd say, for whatever remarks I can make or attempts I can make at tracing the family history. And you notice it begins up at the top with another Robert who married Rachel Wilson. Now we're really going back here with this Robert. This is back in the middle 1700s. I think Mr. Dietz believes that that Robert came from Ireland. We always thought we were of English descent, but we are pretty sure that this Robert to America. Pretty near everybody here, I guess everybody here, comes out of that part of the family tree that says John George married Lucy Pennell Wall, 1773-1850. Now, John George was a tavern keeper, if you will. Tavern in those days being the counterpart of a Holiday Inn or a Ramada Inn today. And he tended his tavern in a place called Greenbrier County, Virginia. It was Virginia then. Dating from the time of the Civil War, it became part of West Virginia. John George was one of 3 children of Robert and Rachel. The others were Susan Abigail, who married a man named Settle, and Joseph Charles, who married Nancy Wall. Now, Lucy Pennell Wall was married twice. Her first husband's name was Wall. Upon his death, she married John George Corron. Lucy had 4 children with Mr. Wall, and 8 children with John George Corron. And her brother-in-law, Joseph Charles, married her daughter by her first marriage, Nancy Wall. Look down at the line that goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 6, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's the number of children that John George and Lucy had. Here begins the Western immigration. 3 of the boys and 1 of the girls came to Illinois. Those boys were James, who was born in 1805, Joseph, who was born in 1813, and Grandpa Robert in 1816. A daughter, Rachel, married a man named Jacob Amick and came out here also. Now, James, Joseph, and Rachel came here in stages, I guess you'd say, no pun intended. But they came first to, or stopped first for a while in the area of Niles, Michigan. Robert came out here directly from West Virginia. Joseph came to, I guess was the first one to come to these parts. He arrived in the spring of 1835, and he settled in Clintonville, which is now known as South Elgin. Robert came out in the fall, driving a team of oxen, and he brought Joseph's girlfriend, Hannah, with him. And in fact, Robert landed here on October 16th, turned around his oxen, and the oxen must have been getting awful tired by this time. But he took Joseph, his brother, and Hannah back into Chicago, where they were married. Then Robert came back here. Now this is Grandpa Robert I'm talking about, who was born in 1816 and was only 19 years old when he arrived here. For the first few weeks that he was in this neighborhood, he lived in a deserted wigwam over on what we call the Meissner farm, which later became the property of the Amicks, his sister and brother-in-law. But there was a spring over there as part of the milk house, and there was a wigwam near it, and he lived there. He built a log cabin here out pretty close to where what we call the cow barn is on this place in time for winter. Time went along, and in 1840 he married a lady named Maria Eddy, who came to this part of the country from New York with her parents. They were married in 1840, and 5 children were born of that marriage. 1 boy, whose name was Addison, and 4 girls. The girls were Adeline, Mary, Adelia, and Flora. In 1850, with, I think, 4 of those children already born or about to be, and with the husband and wife and a couple of hired men and a hired girl, it got a little crowded in the log cabin. So Robert set about building this house, the one we're in today, and it took him 3 or 4 years. He kind of did it in fits and starts. My family and I finished a basement about 15 years ago, and it took us about that long just to do that, so I can understand what Robert went through. Like us, he ran out of money every once in a while, and he had to wait. He hired a carpenter when he could afford him, and I guess 100,000 bricks were made right here on the farm from clay from the field behind the barn, or where the barn stands now, manufactured in a kiln right here. Now, the 5 children that were born of that first marriage, Addison, the only boy, died about 1870, I think at the age of 22, never married. 3 of the 4 girls did not marry: Adeline, Mary, and Flora. One daughter, Adelia, married a man named Gilbert, who was a railroad man, was a station master on the Northwestern Railroad, lived in La Fox for a few years, and then was transferred to Old Wine, Iowa in 1877. My parents continued to correspond with them and went out to visit them, but I'll confess we've sort of lost track of the Gilbert side of the family now. There were sons of that marriage, but we have not kept in touch with them. Maria Eddie Corron, the first wife of Robert, died in 1870. She had been ill since 1861, the birth of her youngest child, Flora, and succumbed finally in 1870. Her son, Addison, died only a little bit later. In 1871, Grandpa Robert, at the age of 55, went courting and married his second wife, Barbara Ann Thompson, who was a school teacher. If you are familiar with the Wasco area, there's a little white building down here at the corner of Burlington Road and Wasco Road that was a schoolhouse, and she was a teacher. She was, Robert was 55, and she was in her upper 20s, so they weren't a couple of wild, crazy kids. I guess they know what they were doing. Stories told when they eloped sort of to Chicago, when they came back, it was quite a surprise to the surviving children that here was Grandpa, their father, bringing in a bride. "How come you did that, Pa?" one of them asked, and he said, "Well, I didn't ask you the first time I got married. There was no reason in doing it this time." Barbara and Grandpa Robert were married in 1871. One child was born of that marriage, and that was my father, Flora's father, and Bob's father, Robert Myron. They had second names to go with the Robertson, and got a little easier to identify them. Robert Myron was born in 1875. We're here to observe this place. As I said, the house was built in 1850, or was started in 1850. Let me toss a few other dates at you about things that how you can relate in time to them. This house, and I can remember as a little 6-year-old kid being out in the kitchen when electricity came in 1931, and I saw the lights go on for the first time. There were 3 marriages in this house. One in 1869, when Adelia married George Gilbert. Something like 65 years whizzed by until the second one. That was Flora and Dexter in, what was it, October 27th, 1934. And then another 47 years goes by until 1981, when Jane and Bob were married here. The big cow barn down there, which of course still is very much in use, was built, the south 2/3 of it, in 1875. The addition, the north end, was added in 1915. The horse barn, which is the big barn out here with Robert Corron, claim on this place. He worked for others. One of his jobs was to milk a cow, and he couldn't do it. And that makes us feel kind of superior, those of us who were able to milk a cow. I haven't tried lately. But anyhow, he never, in all of his life, milked a cow. He always had, I guess, wives or family members or hired hands who did the milking. This comes as a shock to one of his great-grandsons, but he didn't believe in insurance. Also, and this was a good idea for someone who didn't believe in insurance, he didn't like lamps or lanterns in barns. He insisted that all the milking be done before sundown or after sunrise. Dave, I would think you would applaud that kind of a setup myself. Now, Robert Myron married Augusta Louise Meissner in 1910. 3 children were born of that marriage. Robert Charles, another Robert with a different name, so we can call him Robert Charles. Flora, and I won't use her middle name, and Calvin, I'll use mine, Morris, because that ties up with another part of the family I'm coming to. Remember I told you about the other 2 boys that came out here, and Rachel. Joseph, well, let's start with the others and work up to Joseph. Rachel Amick and her husband settled over here on what is called the Meissner farm, and lived there for many years before moving to Chicago. James Corron, who came here from Niles with his wife, and he was already married, settled over here on what is now called the Goldenstein farm, which adjoins this property. James only lived until 1846, but he had a son named Wesley who ran the farm for many years. He had no male descendants, and the family, the farm remained in with daughters and granddaughters, Hammonds, Farmelows, and so on, until it was sold to Mr. Goldenstein. Joseph Corron remained in South Elgin, and the farm that he settled is, I guess, what would you say, northeast of town, or east of South Elgin?
East.
More east than anything.
Straight east.
Now go back to the chart, if you will, and see where Joseph is. Married to Hannah Tucker. Remember, Robert brought her out here from Virginia. They had 6 children. One of their daughters, Mary, was named Cornelia, and she married a man named Sam Manley. And she and Sam had 6 children, one of whom was named Grace, and who was the mother of the Kenyons who are here. And another was a son named Albert Manley, who was Jean Manley's father. And another son. And Betty, is Betty here? Oh, sure. How are you? Can't see you away. And Betty and Jean were their daughter and son. Another son was Joseph Morris Manley, where the Morris in my name comes from. And incidentally, Jean tells me his middle name is Corron. So I guess we owe you one. Now, there is another offshoot of the Corron family represented here today. Go back to your basic chart. And you remember the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
It was Cliff and Warren.
And Cliff and Warren.
Tom? Do those people, does Betty have a chart like this? You've got some more next to you there, haven't you?
Okay.
Under number 6, well no, under number 4, you see Lila, married to Jesse Ellis. Now this is one of the John George and Lucy's children who stayed home in West Virginia. And we have as one of our guests today, Dennis Dietz, who is what, a grandson of Delilah and Jesse. Am I right in that?
Great-grandson.
Great-grandson. And I think most of you have met Dennis. He came to us, or comes to us today from South Charleston, West Virginia. And I think anybody that comes that far for a family reunion ought to have a chance to say a few words. Dennis?
Thank you. Well, of course, I got acquainted with Cindy through my interest in genealogy, and her interest in genealogy. Of course, you mentioned Delta Cross from Florida. I think she's been here, hasn't she?
Yes.
And we all sort of carry a 3-way correspondence all from time to time. And of course, she has asked me a lot of questions that I can't answer. For instance, where was John G. buried? I know, I think, but that's the best I can say. In a little area in the corner of Nicholas County. Now, I know that the son Joseph bought land from him. I think I know where the land, then he held on it till 1830s, sold it and came here. Now, what happened between Lucy and John G. is what happened, but they lived roughly the same period of, their deaths were close together. But, in 1840, all we have about him is that he was living apparently with this daughter, Elizabeth. Now, the census don't say who the daughter was, it just gives her age, and that matches Elizabeth. And 3 children named Nutter. Well, now again, we're assuming Nutter. We assume it's her children. At that time in the census, it only mentions those things. Now, the one thing I wonder a little about, you know, in your write-up, you tell that they left because John G. had a tavern. Now, I don't think it's hardly possible he could have had a tavern in Nicholas County at the time the children were born, because that would have really been almost a tavern for no one. That was really isolated country.
I don't think we ever heard that, and we just heard
Didn't
that
he mention that?
he was a tavern keeper.
Well,
Now, he may have been just for a few years.
or sometime before that. But on back then, the grandparents came from,
Halfway house.
where did they come from in Virginia, what county near Washington?
Good number, does that sound like?
It wasn't, it was right near Washington, Culpeper County. Yeah,
Okay.
they come from Culpeper County to Greenbrier County. And the original, what would be John G.'s father and mother, should be buried in a little place called Rennick. I believe it's Rennick, it's one of the 2 towns, right above Lewisburg, which is the county seat. And they have a tombstone there now.
I should apologize to you. Dennis came last spring, and I took him down to Bluff City because Bob and I had gone to Bluff City, several years ago, looking for
Lucy's
the Corrons, and we found Joseph Corron and a record of the 5 boys who died. And then there was a flat slab, and that was Lucy Pinell Corron. But when we went back to look last spring, we didn't find that slab. Do you know anything about that? I was going to go back and talk to somebody there and see if there was a record of it. But you know how those limestone gravestones are, and I imagine it just deteriorated, and the caretakers cleaned it up and threw it out. But apparently Lucy Corron was buried in Bluff City next to. She may have been moved from the old Bluff City. I don't know enough about the history of that area, but she might have been moved from there. But she died in 1850, and it was buried on the same. It would be your great grandfather's grave.
Okay, now, with my nephew, born in West Virginia, he works in Chicago, Bernie Andrews is with me. 2 nieces that live right close to, where did they tell you they live now?
Lyle.
Okay, and they're used to live in West Virginia.
Well, it's nice to have all of you here.
Yeah, thank you. So if you haven't met them, why?
Do you know any more than the precious little I said about the original Robert on top of the chart here, who married Rachel Wilson and were the parents of John George and Susan Abigail and Joseph Charles?
I imagine you have everything. Most of this came through Bill Reese, and I think yes, we do, but I can't call it offhand. Can you?
No, I'm...
He didn't. You were the one that told me that you thought they were of Irish descent.
We're fairly certain of that, I think. We're fairly certain of that. There is one interesting thing about that is the land grants show that in Kenai County, right on the Kenai River, well, one of them's a little aside, he and someone else got land grants for 100,000 acres. Now, all we can presume that apparently none of the children prospered from that. We have presumed that as a soldier, some land company may have used them to acquire this land because he never came to Kanawha County. So that's all you can just guess why, because that would have been valuable in the 1790s.
How is it today?
Well, I won't go into that. It'll be.
Betty and I were ready to pack and leave here. Sounds pretty good.
Yeah, it'll really be something.
Well, we thank you all for coming. It's very nice. I hope you take this with you as a souvenir. So when we all gather on the 200th year anniversary of the settling of this farm, Cindy won't have to draw it and type it.
You don't expect I'll be around.
Thank you so much. Nice to be here.
It's 19
I heard Warren say they forgot Warren and Clifford. I'll have to correct my
Now,
brother
that
on
don't make any
that.
difference, it won't make any difference to them.
Well, you were named for it, weren't you?
I guess so.
I'll just go right over and correct it.
Let's begin right here. This is